There is something most people will never admit to themselves, not out loud, not even in the quiet of a sleepless night. It is this: the thing that keeps hurting you is not the world. Most people believe their pain comes from outside, from the person who left, from the opportunity that disappeared, from the cruelty, the betrayal, the bad luck. They spend years rearranging the outside of their lives, convinced that if they just fix the right thing, find the right relationship, reach the right milestone, the hurt will finally stop. But it doesn't stop. And that is the first uncomfortable truth we need to sit with today. Think about someone in your life who seems to carry pain wherever they go. You've probably seen them change jobs, change cities, change partners. Each time, they believe this is the last move. This time, things will be different. And for a while, they are, but slowly. The same feeling creeps back in, the same low-level ache, the same sense that something is missing, the same wound, just in a different place. This is not a coincidence. And it is not weakness, it is a pattern, a deeply human pattern, one that Carl Jung spent decades trying to understand. Jung said something that still shocks people when they really hear it. He said that most human suffering is not inflicted by the world. It is self-inflicted, but not consciously. We carry what he called the shadow, that hidden part of us we refuse to look at directly. The parts we rejected early in life because they seemed dangerous, shameful, unwanted. The child who learned that anger was unacceptable grows into an adult who cannot set a boundary. The child who learned that need was a burden grows into someone who pushes everyone away before they can leave. We do not see this happening. That is the nature of shadow. It lives in the basement of who we are, and from down there, it shapes everything. Now, here is where things become deeper. The wound is not just about what happened to you. It is about the story you built around what happened. Every hurt you carry is wrapped in a story. And inside that story, there is a version of you who is fundamentally fragile, fundamentally at risk. A version of you who learned very early that the world was a place where bad things happen to you. This belief becomes invisible after enough time. It stops feeling like a belief. It starts feeling like reality. You don't think I believe the world is dangerous? You simply feel anxious in open spaces. You don't think I believe I will always be abandoned? You simply feel an unexplained panic when someone you love doesn't text back quickly enough. This is what psychologists call the emotional nervous system. It is not rational. It does not respond to logic. It responds to patterns, to familiar shapes of fear, and it was built quietly and carefully by everything that happened to you before you were old enough to question any of it. And so the conflict begins. On one side, the person you consciously want to be, open, trusting, free, present. On the other side, the person your nervous system insists you must be to stay safe, guarded, controlled, ready for betrayal, always scanning the room for what might go wrong. This is not a conflict between good and bad. It is a conflict between the self you grew into and the self that was frozen in place by experiences it couldn't process at the time. Jung called this the tension between the persona, the face we show the world, and the deeper, unresolved self underneath it. Kierkegaard would have called it something else. He would have said this is the anxiety of being, the dread that comes not from any specific thing, but from the terrifying openness of existing at all. You feel it when you're on the edge of something real, a new relationship, a vulnerable conversation, a dream you almost dare to pursue. That is not fear of the future. That is the shadow of the past, casting itself forward. So what do most people do with this tension? They manage it. They build lives that are carefully designed to avoid the original wound being touched again. The person who was humiliated learns to perform competence so perfectly that no one can ever get close enough to see them fail. The person who was abandoned learns to need no one, becoming an island they call independence but feel as loneliness. The person who was controlled becomes reckless, mistaking chaos for freedom. These are not character flaws. They are intelligent adaptations. They worked at some point. They kept you safe when you had no other tools. But here is the uncomfortable truth. What kept you safe as a child is now keeping you small as an adult. The armor you built to survive is now the cage you can't escape. This is where the shift begins. Not with a decision, not with willpower, not with a list of things you're going to do differently. Starting Monday, It begins with something far simpler and far more terrifying. It begins with seeing, really seeing, not understanding in the way you nod along to something intellectual, but seeing in the way that makes your chest tight, because suddenly you recognize yourself in what you are looking at. Viktor Frankl wrote about this from a place of devastating experience. After surviving the Nazi death camps, he observed something that permanently changed the way we think about human suffering. He noticed that the people who survived, not just physically, but inwardly, were the ones who could separate themselves from what was happening to them, not through denial, not by pretending it wasn't real, but by becoming aware that between any experience and any response, there is a space, a gap. And in that gap lives the one thing no external force can ever take from you: your awareness, your ability to observe your own experience without being completely consumed by it. This is not a trick. This is not positivity reframing. This is one of the most difficult things a human being can do. To say, I am in pain, and I'm also watching myself be in pain. And in watching it, truly watching it, slowly, something shifts. Because here is what happens when you begin to really see the pattern. The pattern loses some of its grip, not all at once, not dramatically, but the way ice slowly loses its grip in early spring, almost imperceptibly, until one day, something moves that didn't move before. You notice the familiar anxiety arise, but instead of becoming it, you recognize it. There it is again, that old feeling, the one that says, I'm about to be left, about to be judged, about to fail. And you can say, quietly, inside, I know you. You are not the present, you are the past. This is not magic. This is not instant healing. But it is the beginning of something real, because every time you see the pattern clearly, instead of living inside it blindly, you are doing something your nervous system has never been allowed to do before. You are letting the present be different from the past. And now, something important appears. Most people, when they hear the phrase, nothing will ever hurt you again, think it means becoming numb, building higher walls, needing less, caring about nothing. But that is the exact opposite of what this means. The people who get hurt the most are not the ones who are most open. They are the ones who are most asleep. They are sleepwalking through a life still scripted by old wounds, running from ghosts they've never stopped to look at directly. True invulnerability, the kind that is real, not performed, does not come from closing. It comes from no longer having an unhealed place for old pain to grab onto. Think of it this way. If someone throws a stone at a window, it shatters. But if someone throws a stone at the ocean moves, accepts it, and closes back around it. The ocean is not numb. It is not indifferent. It is simply so vast that no single stone can define it. This is what becomes possible when you stop pretending the wound isn't there and start sitting with it long enough to understand it. You become larger than it, not because the hurt never existed. It did, and it mattered, and you are allowed to know that, but because you no longer need the wound to tell you who you are, because slowly, through honest self-examination, through the quiet courage of really looking, you discover something strange. The self that you thought needed protecting doesn't need protecting in the way you believed. It was never as fragile as your fear insisted. It was never as broken as your shame suggested. It was simply young and overwhelmed and without tools, and it made the best meaning it could out of experiences that were too large for it to hold. Here is what changes when this begins to sink in. You stop needing people to behave in a specific way to keep your sense of self intact. You stop needing constant reassurance because reassurance was a patch on a wound, and now you are tending the wound directly. You stop interpreting ordinary disappointments as confirmation of your deepest fears, not because the disappointments stop coming. They don't. But because you are no longer a raw nerve waiting to be touched. You develop what the philosophers might call equanimity, what ordinary people call peace. Not the peace of someone who has given up, the peace of someone who has finally stopped running. So maybe this is where we arrive. Not at the end of pain. No honest person promises that. But at the end of a particular kind of suffering, the suffering that comes not from life itself, but from the story you've been unconsciously telling about life. The story that says, I am someone that bad things happen to. The story that says, I am someone who cannot be enough. The story that says love always leaves, trust always breaks, hope is always punished. These stories were written a long time ago, in rooms you may barely remember, by a version of you that was doing the best they could, but you are not in that room anymore. And you are not that version of you, unless you choose to keep living as though you are. Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again, not because the world becomes kind, not because people stop leaving or disappointing or failing, but because the unguarded place inside you, the place that old pain always found, will no longer be a wound waiting to be opened. It will be something else entirely. A place that has been seen, understood, held. A place that is, finally, at home in itself, and from there, from that quiet, self-possessed center, you can let the world in fully, without armor, without performance, without fear of being undone, because you know, now, in a way no one can argue you out of, that whatever comes, you will not be broken by it. You have already met the deepest part of yourself, and it was always, always strong enough